We negate. Contention 1 is terrorism. U.S. counterterrorism efforts in the Gulf have been extremely successful. The IEP finds in 2019 that U.S. military efforts have reduced deaths from terrorism by 75% in Iraq. Problematically, Schmidt 20 of the New York Times reports that a recent secession of U.S. operations against ISIS has allowed remnants of their group to regain some strength in Iraq and Syria. A U.S. withdrawal could overwhelm the region with a terrorist resurgence. Alyssa Rubin 20 of the New York Times finds that Iraqi forces would be hampered by a lack of U.S. drone intelligence and air cover. New America 19 continues that vital U.S. training built the current Iraqi counterterrorism force from the ground up. Additionally, Lewis Lovelock 20 of the Washington Post finds that the current U.S. presence in the Gulf provides deterrence. Terrorist groups know that the U.S. can attack and destroy them, which is why Belcher of the LaGrange College explains that having large numbers of U.S. troops on foreign soil reduces annual terrorist attacks from 163 to 9. Walcott 19 of Time furthers that a withdrawal could create a power vacuum in the Gulf and give ISIS greater ability to mount attacks, upending 5 years of counterterrorism progress. Schmidt writes that if the U.S. were to pull troop presence in Iraq, the region would be left vulnerable to a resurgent terrorist wave, just like what happened in 2011 when Obama pulled troops out of Iraq. Affirming jeopardizes millions of lives, Hispanian 20 of the New York Times finds that 40 million civilians are vulnerable to an ISIS resurgence. Contention 2 is police militarization. After the U.S. withdraws troops from abroad, the War History magazine writes that we have millions of weapons left over in stockpiles. Apuzzo 14 of the New York Times finds that when the military has surpluses of weapons, they give these to state police through police officers through the DoD 1033 program. Thus, Fisher 16 of the Reason Foundation finds empirically that large weapon stockpiles have enabled police officers to, quote, load up on state-of-the-art war machines, tactical gear, guns, and explosives. We've seen this historically. Massaro 15 of UMadrid quantifies that after U.S. troop withdrawal from Iraq and Afghanistan in 2009, the number of severely militarized departments rose by 28 percentage points. High levels of militarization exacerbate the problem of police brutality in 2 ways. First is by making them seem invincible. Jesse Singal of New York Magazine explains in 2018 that giving police military-grade weapons encourages them to see the public as the enemy and act more violently. Second is by mandating excessive force. Amanda Vox explains in 2018 that the DoD 1033 program requires these weapons to be used within a year, forcing small operations to escalate into SWAT-style raids. The impact is preventing racialized violence. Sigel continues that over-militarization of the police allows for an increase in killings and a crackdown of freedom of speech and public protest. The BBC found in 2016 that police brutality killed 1,000 Americans that year, most of whom were Black or Latino. Contention 3 is the U.S. security guarantee. Hoggerdahl 19 of the Center for Strategic Studies explains that the U.S. military presence is the best security guarantee available to allies in the Persian Gulf. A sudden U.S. withdrawal disrupts the regional stability in 2 ways. First is by scaring Israel. Harel 19 of Haaretz explains that Israel's longstanding fears of Iran have been heightened after recent perceptions of an American with desire to withdraw from the Gulf. As such, Mazzetti 20 of the New York Times finds that Israel repeatedly pressured the United States to maintain a hardline stance in Iran and increase strikes against proxies in Iraq and Syria. American presence prevents further escalation as Abbott 14 of U. Lesser warns that Israel is only restrained by U.S. military presence acting as a counterweight to Iran. A U.S. withdrawal would confirm Israeli fears, triggering an Israeli attack on Iran. Critically, Farley 20 of the National Interest finds that an Israeli strike on Iran could easily go nuclear. Haaretz concludes that the resulting war would leave the United States in Israel permanently. Dallas 13 of Biomed Central quantifies that 7 million civilians would be killed. Second is proliferation. Hal Brands 15 of the Foreign Policy Research Institute finds that the United States security guarantee has prevented nuclearization since the 1950s from Germany and Italy to South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Van Jackson 15 of Foreign Policy explains because the U.S. military presence assures protection, allies are less likely to launch preventative strikes. J. Wellington Brown 17 of the U.S. Air Force finds that this presence has worked as allies are not considering nuclearizing right now. Absent military presence, however, Brands continues that the U.S. would likely lose its non-proliferation leverage, which Brands finds would lead allies like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt to nuclearize. Unfortunately, Hoggerdahl continues that U.S. withdrawal would spur an arms race, leading to military confrontations. Brown continues that Saudi Arabia, for example, to nuclearize, Israel would likely attack Saudi Arabia preemptively, resulting in a region-wide conflict between the Arab states and Israel. Overall, Douglas Gibler of the University of Kentucky confirms that arms races increase the chance of war by 500%, and Allison 18 of Kent State explains that when a power has nuclear weapons, it increases the chance of proxy wars by 54%. Thus we negate.
Alrighty, can everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. Then with that, Highland affirms our sole contention is restoring the balance. U.S. military presence has shattered the Gulf. Surgeon of West Point in 2019 reports that the intervention of the military and presence of our troops has fragmented the once stable Gulf by empowering separatists and hindering regional cooperation. There are 2 ways that reducing military presence resolves this internal fracturing, and the first is by easing rogue actors. The United States military presence is seen as a threat to its enemies in the Gulf. Jones of the Atlantic in 2011 writes that U.S. military presence in the Gulf has surrounded the Iranian military, putting them under a constant threat. This approach has strengthened hardliners and convinced them that the best path to self-preservation is through defiance, militarism, and the pursuit of dangerous ties with extremist groups, which is why Jones concludes that conflict could easily spin out of control. This is confirmed by Rizé of the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies in 2015, who finds that Iranian military strategy is one of defensive realism, where Iran uses a reactionary approach to achieve balance in the region against U.S. interests, which have been destabilizing. This is why Iran constantly flares up internal conflict in response to U.S. action. The second way is by removing the security guarantee. The United States not only emboldens its enemies to stir up conflicts, but also inspires its allies to act out. Jones warns that U.S. policymakers refuse to confront Gulf states on their actions due to the continued belief that we need to keep military presence in the region. As a result, our presence emboldens states like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain to continue to work in counterproductive ways, cracking down on local democratic movements while falsely claiming Iranian meddling. Glazer of the National Interest in 2014 furthers that U.S. military presence in countries like Qatar creates a level of tolerance for host governments, financial support of radical extremist groups. Glazer furthers that the Gulf states receive tangible benefits from their alliance with the U.S. in the form of a security guarantee in which they believe the U.S. will come to their defense from adversaries, promoting counterproductive strategies to peace. As a result, Benson of UChicago in 2011 writes that unconditional alliances increase conflict by 249%. The only way to resolve this is to reduce our footprint in the Gulf. It is for these two reasons that Octos of the Middle Eastern Policy Council in 2011 writes that a reduced U.S. military footprint in the region would allow Iran and Gulf states to pursue regional cooperation with each other, as the U.S.'s external presence has been the driving destabilizing factor. This shift to regional cooperation is key, as Valesco of UCF in 2013 quantifies that regional actors are roughly 3.5 times more likely to craft an agreement that ceases hostilities for at least 5 years compared to when external actors are involved. There are two big impacts. The first is preventing genocide. The conflict in Yemen has escalated. Bachman of The Conversation in 2018 writes that more than 22 million people are in need of humanitarian aid, and the destruction brought by the conflict in the region has amounted to genocide. By facilitating a shift away from the U.S., matters between Iranian-backed Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition would be resolved. Hamadan of King's College in 2013 writes that American presence in the Gulf led to severe polarization of positions and ended cooperation between regional actors. Fortunately, Parsi of Foreign Policy in 2020 confirms that once the Saudi government realized the U.S. military was no longer at their disposal, there was an 80% reduction in Saudi-led airstrikes. Roth of Human Rights Watch in 2018 terminalizes that reducing airstrikes is key to ending the genocide, as they have taken out homes, schools, health facilities, and innocent civilians. The second impact is a U.S.-Iran war. U.S. military presence creates an escalating spiral of aggression that threatens miscalculation and war with Iran. Malecki in 2014 confirms that American military actions are interpreted as the most aggressive. As a consequence, military skirmishes result in a spiral model where conflicts arise, but when conflicts arise, both actors escalate to prevent others from getting the upper hand. The risk of such miscalculation is higher now than ever before, as Al Jazeera just a few months ago reported that Iran shot down a Ukrainian plane thinking it was U.S. military personnel. Overall, Avery from the University of Copenhagen in 2013 concludes that a war with Iran would escalate, entirely destabilizing the Middle East, drawing in global powers like Russia and China, and resulting in the use of nuclear weapons, ultimately causing extinction. Thus, we affirm. We all good for cross-ex?
Did you unmute yourself?
I forgot to mute myself during case.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm good for cross. You can ask the first question.
Sweet. So I just want to start on your contention 3 subpoint A about scaring Israel. You say that Israel is going to launch this preemptive strike if they get scared. If the United States pulls out of the Gulf but still has military presence in Israel and is protecting Israel, why is Israel scared?
Because Israel fears that Iran has more influence now. And they also think that since the United States pulled out from backing other allies, there's a risk that they pull out from backing them. So they think that launching that preemptive attack is the only way for them to be safe. Right.
So just one follow-up to that. Is Israel scared of influence spreading in general, or is Israel scared of influence spreading towards them or into Israel?
Probably generally, but you can make arguments about that. I don't know.
You can have a question.
Sure. So let's talk about your first link. So you say that the United States, let's talk about your second impact about conflicts with Iran. So you read evidence from like 3 months ago that says that we are very close to war with Iran. So why hasn't that war broken out yet?
Yeah, our argument is about miscalc. So we'd argue the probability is really high. We give you an example of when they accidentally shot down a U.S. plane, and Iran said like that's the closest we've been to nuclear war. That's the biggest mistake we've made.
So why didn't we go to war after they shot down that plane?
because that wasn't enough to trigger. Yeah, our argument's about a spiraling effect where things get worse and worse, and I think we're seeing that trend right now.
Are we? Because
Our argument,
escalations have either side taken.
what miscalculations we give you? Iran doesn't recognize that it's not a U.S. plane and shoots it out of the sky.
No, that was like 3 months ago. What has happened since then? Because there's been no escalation since, right? Like neither side is about to gear up to go to war.
I don't know about like big events, but I mean the conflict is obviously still going high, like on, and tensions are still high. That's why we're having this
I don't
debate.
think they are, right? Because after there was some miscalculation earlier, Iran came out and said, "Oh, that wasn't us. That was a different proxy group. We were not involved in this." Clearly, neither side wants to go to war, which is why we haven't seen the United States deploy more troops to try and attack Iran, or we haven't seen Iran take
So, just to clarify on that, the Al Jazeera evidence is actually really explicit. Iran took responsibility for the attack, so it definitely wasn't another proxy. So maybe we're talking about a different thing. Do you mind if I get a question?
Different thing. Yeah, I'm just saying Iran wants to make sure that they are like not at crossroads with the United States.
Right. So our argument, obviously, nobody wants to go to nuclear war, but one miscalculation is all it takes for extinction. The magnitude.
Okay.
That's what.
One of
Do you mind if I get a question? Sorry,
Yeah,
do you mind if I just get a question? Okay, so on your contention too about militarization, how many assault weapons would go to police officers?
Our evidence says that after we pulled out of previous conflicts, we had millions of weapons left over. And then the Masera evidence says that the last time we pulled out of Syria and Iraq, there was a 28 percentage point increase in the number of departments that were militarized.
So 28% more. And then, like, what was the result of that militarization?
So that means like it went from 13% to whatever 13 plus 28 is.
Yeah, right. So like, what was the result of that militarization? The
We saw
impact.
an increase in police violence.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, can we see that evidence? Sorry, just the impact of on that, and then we'll be good.
Which card?
The one that says
The one that says
racialized
that racialized violence went up because everyone was or the police were militarized.
We can't give you evidence that says because of those specific instances. We can give you the evidence from the links that say when we have more police militarization, it increases racialized violence.
Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Just send both of those cards. Do you want them from both links?
I don't think you read Evan the first link. Did
Yeah,
you?
we'll take them for both links.
We did.
Yeah, we
read
did. There's
Sigil.
There's
and then
single
Taub.
and then Taub. Do you want both of those?
Whichever one's the 20%.
Oh.
Wait, the Masera evidence about
Yeah,
the
this
increase
is
in
like
militarization?
23%. You said.
No, the 28% is a 28% increase in the number of militarized districts. The evidence that says that we've seen an increase in racialized violence as a result of that are the Sigil and the Taub evidence.
Okay, we'll take both. Yeah, and the emails are in there. So, and we'll.
In the chat. All right, we'll send.
Wait,
Yeah,
2 seconds. Seth listed 3 pieces.
He said
Which
no,
ones do you want? Do you
Sigil
want
and Taub.
all? Do you want Signal and Taub?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just sent it.
Perfect. We'll let you know when we get that.
Okay. Do I want to take prep to look at that?
Yeah, we will once it comes through.
I think I put in someone's email wrong. Let me check. I put a K instead of an X in your name. I'm sorry. Let me just
I
fix
got it. It's fine.
Oh, it's all right. My partner got it, so we
we'll
will
start
start running our
prep
prep now.
Okay, cool.
All righty. There. We have 43 seconds used.
How many?
43 seconds. Oh,
43
yeah,
seconds.
43 seconds.
All right, we'll run prep for rebuttal.
We'll run for rebuttal starting now.
Oh, restart.
Can we see the extinction evidence?
Yep. We will send that over to you.
Are you gonna read extinction first, Wayne?
It depends if you read weighing, but probably not, honestly.
Okay.
Do you still want it?
Yeah, we'll just see it.
Cool.
Wait, what does it depend on? Like, what weighing would we read that causes you to read that?
It
Yeah,
just
you're-
depends on
yeah.
how the round
Yeah,
develops.
like
I
if
guess
we go
like, we'll
util-
decide if we
Okay, yeah.
We'll just call
we'll
the
just call the evidence.
Yeah. Which extinction
did you
card?
guys want?
Did you
Yeah,
want the
first.
warrant or the miscalc empirics or the thing that says Iran war causes extinction?
You just
Iran
send,
war causes extinction.
Okay.
you send every card in the impact, honestly.
All right, that just got sent
Sent.
out, so just let us know when you get it.
Yep, we got it. We'll
Alright,
resume
okay.
prep time now. Okay.
We used a minute 25.
It's going to be 2 overviews, then top down on their case.
Where can I flow those over?
Yeah, should we take out a separate sheet? Like, are they offensive, defensive?
They're responsive, so they're just general responses. So all.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Okay. Everyone's good? The first overview is that American aggression is not unique to a negative world. 3 warrants. A. Fin 18 explains that the military-industrial complex profits off of war, so they continue to force our, so they spend billions lobbying our government to continue. B. Walt explains that the Congress is filled with neoconservatives who believe it is their duty to export liberty to other nations. And C. Sobelman explains that Israel uses the threat of a preemptive attack to coerce the United States to stay involved in the region. There are 2 implications. The first is a bombing campaign. There's historical precedent. When Nixon pulled out of Vietnam, he began a bombing campaign in response. And Aronson explains that in 2019, when Trump pulled out of Syria, he began bombing. This turns both of the arguments in their case. A, because Iran definitely acts more aggressively when the United States is attacking them, and B, Saudi Arabia definitely acts more aggressively when the United States is still there. The second implication is sanctions. Sobelman explains that the last time we threatened to pull out, Israel forced us to take sanctions we otherwise would not have. And Forsh explains that the sanctions regime has killed 500,000 people. That is a much larger impact than theirs, and also turns the Iranian impact because Iran continues to lash out. The second overview is that Iran is never going to, or 4 warrants. A, Reid explains that Iran is facing domestic issues that force it to turn internal. Second, Rubenstein explains that they are focused on regime survival and know they would get annihilated in the chance of war. C, Vakil explains that they are sick of war, which is why they are currently trying to negotiate. And D, Parsi explains that they are 8 times behind the GCC with regards to military capacity, which is why empirically, in times of conflict, we have seen Iranian de-escalation as opposed to escalation. For example, they took out a precision strike after the killing of Soleimani, not an active strike because they did not want to escalate. Empirics are on our side. Go to the first link about the security guarantee. It's non-unique for 3 reasons. A is that the threat of a U.S. invasion is always there, so Iran is always going to employ forward defense so that the United States doesn't attack them. B is that the main reason why they're employing forward defense is so that Saudi Arabia and Israel don't attack them. That threat is still there. But third is that forward defense is working for them, and they're succeeding in gaining regional strength. So there is no incentive they have for decreasing it. But then you can turn it because Cropsey explains that when the United States leaves, Russia enters because they are no longer deterred, and they would stir up trouble in the Middle East to distract to create a problem that the United States has to focus on so they can focus on their internal affairs in Europe. This makes the conflict worse, but also you can turn it again because you embolden Iranian and hardliners when you tell them that the actions that they have been taking right now are successful in driving out U.S. troops, and as a result, conflict escalates. Then go to the security guarantee. Hardy explains that the reason why Saudi Arabia would lay down its arms is because of a psychological deficit, but we think that intent is always still for them to attack. 2 warrants. A, Rogan explains that they negotiate when they are secure, and that is empirical. When Saudi Arabia is secure, when the United States is on their side, that's when they negotiate. Second, Roblin gives you the empirics when he says that the negotiations they talk about and their impact actually happened after we redeployed another 20,000 troops, which means empirics are on our side. Go to their first impact about the genocide. 3 turns. A, Goldenberg explains that if we break off our relationship with Saudi Arabia, they'll no longer listen to us on issues of human rights and ethical warfare practices that on net makes the conflict worse. 2, turn it again. Kidajowski explains that by decreasing Saudi capability, you make the warfare symmetric, which makes it draw out longer because there is no decisive winner in the end. So the proxy war just continues to exist. Third, you can turn it again because Rogan explains that if they don't have the U.S. intelligence, they're just going to begin carpet bombing in Yemen, which makes the attacks less precise and increases deaths. Go to the U.S.-Iran war. So their evidence is from 3 months ago, and they do not give you any evidence of any form of escalation since then, which means that empirically it is denied. But second, we say that neither side wants war. It would look really bad for Trump if he went to war during an election month. Their extinction evidence is a reason to vote for us for 2 reasons. A, it says that the extinction scenario happens when the United States forces them to attack, which is the overview I read, which says that so it says that extinction happens when Israel forces the United States to attack, which is the overview I read that said that if we pulled out, Israel would force the United States to take more aggressive actions. B, it says that extinction happens when Russia and China get drawn into the war, and that's the Cropsey evidence that says that currently they are deterred, but they enter the war in the event that the United States comes in. Those are both impact turns. Thank you. Please vote affirmative. Negative.
We need to see the troops evidence.
Which one?
Our negotiations only happened because we redeployed troops.
So the analysis is an indictment to the Parsi evidence so the evidence says that we sent troops between when the Parsi evidence says that we pulled out troops and negotiations began. Do you still want the card?
Wait, yeah. Could you say that one more time? It says that.
So this is we are refuting the analysis of Parsi.
Yeah.
Parsi says we pulled out here and negotiations happened here. and the
Uh-huh.
card says that we resent troops before the before the date of the negotiations.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll see it.
Yeah, send it.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna need to see bombing campaigns, the bombing campaigns and the sanctions evidence at the top.
Okay, we'll add those to the thing.
Yep.
You're not.
Sorry. Do you want the impact evidence on the sanctions as well, or just the link cards?
Just the link cards.
Okay, I sent them. It's the sent troops, sanctions, bombing.
We just got it, so we will start prep. We'll stop there. That's a minute 35 used, another minute 35 used. So I think that's,
Like 40 something seconds.
yeah, 40 something. Yeah, like 40 seconds left.
Okay.
Okay, I'll switch over. So unmute. Okay. Is everybody ready? I'm gonna start off. It's just gonna be the order of his last speech and then my case or their case. My bad. Okay. Everyone ready? Start on their first overview. You can group the first two links together with the MIC and Congress because Parsi responds to this really well. No matter how many troops or how many weapons we deploy into the region, what Parsi finds is that Trump refuses to get into a shooting war with the Iranian government, which means that the only risk of solvency is getting troop presence out of the region because the troop presence right now is not supporting our allies. It's not backing them up. And also they're preventing Iran from aggressing, which means that the only way to get Iran to the negotiating table is to pull us out of the region. The two implications they give are about bombing and sanctions. The first one on bombing, the evidence is talking about Nixon. It's super outdated. Trump would literally never do this. No warranting as to why this is applicable to the status quo. But odd sanctions, we control after evidence. It doesn't say the word sanctions once. Then we'll concede the second overview that Iran doesn't go to war. That's totally fine. We're not going to go for the Iran war impact. Go to their responses. You can group the first two together, talking about how threats of the U.S. invasion are still there. The problem is that the threat goes away when the U.S. puts a notion of withdrawing the majority of its military presence out of the region. That's the Octave 11 evidence, which tells you that for the U.S.'s external influence to leave the region, that pursues regional cooperation. The next thing they say is the defensive operations are working now, but that is only because the U.S. is in the region and countries like Saudi Arabia are not going to negotiate. That is the exact same reason Iran doesn't negotiate now. Then they say that Russia's going to enter. Two problems. First, we have evidence that says that the Russian military is collapsing right now. That's the NBC evidence. But second, Q119 finds that the Gulf is going to be really important for Russia's energy investments. They're not going to invade militarily. It's just not in their interests. Then they talk about how there's going to be more attacks coming from the outside. The first thing they say here is that they're not going to be able to negotiate like Saudi Arabia won't be able to. But Wall Street Journal in 2019 finds that Saudi Arabia is pushing for negotiations with Iran, not because they have more troops in the region, but because they know that they don't have a security guarantee from the U.S. This is the exact analysis we give on the overview. But the second thing they say is that our negotiations happen post-troop deployments. Their own evidence doesn't make the comparative analysis for you. In fact, our Parsi evidence tells you that Saudi Arabia pushed for negotiations because they didn't have a tactic security guarantee from the U.S. And the New York Times even finds that Saudi Arabia is pushing for negotiations right now, and the U.S. is the only one that's getting in the way because Iran wants to fight every last American. You can extend the Valesco evidence here because we tell you that when the U.S. and Iran cooperate, it starts to cause regional cooperation. Then they give you a bunch of terms talking about how Saudi Arabia won't listen, but none of these actually matter because we say that the reason that Saudi Arabia doesn't listen is because, or like, all of the reasons, all the terms don't matter because they're outdated. Our evidence from the New York Times postdates all this and says that Saudi Arabia is pushing for negotiations with Iran right now. The only reason that they are not doing it is because Iran aggresses. If we win our Iran link, which we fully frontline, we win the round. Go to their case. Their first contention is about terrorism. At the top, it's not unique. The CWN in 2016 finds that we have cyber operations that solve back for terrorism. For example, we had Operation Going Symphony that took down the social media presence of these organizations, and as a result, the Wilson Center writes that there's been a 98% reduction in terrorism. Second, you can turn it. SAC 17 finds that regional powers are much more likely to solve back for terrorism because U.S. presence is the reason why there are recruitments happening right now. In fact, Jordan 17 finds that retaliatory attacks would lead to recruitment and civilian deaths, and it causes it to be a lot harder to fight terrorist organizations. You can get rid of terrorism if you vote AF. But then on their second contention about the police militarizing, you can group their links together three terms. First, genocide is the worst form of racism. We would say that if we win genocide, we outweigh on scope because there's going to be a lot more worse impacts inside of Yemen than inside of the U.S. But second, we would say that intervention of the U.S. military itself is rooted in colonialism and racism. It is a prerequisite to their argument. Remember, there are advocates in the U.S. Congress that support domestic racism, but there are no advocates inside of countries like Yemen that support international genocide, which means that we are always going to be a prerequisite. But then third, you can turn again. Carrick 17 finds that the program that they talk about has allowed police, has given police the ability to fight domestic terrorism like right-wing white supremacists. This is important because Watts 19 finds that right-wing terrorist groups take down things like LGBTQ rights and are also racist, which means that we also outweigh on the discriminatory violence. Then go to contention 3 about security guarantees. Their first link is about Iran getting scared. Gross 19 finds that the U.S. has bases in Israel right now. There's no reason they escalate. But second, Lindoff 11 finds that the U.S. is literally the controller of all their military presence. There's no reason that they escalate. On their second link about proliferation, you can turn it. Parsi even takes this into account. She finds that when the U.S. started to not support military operations of Gulf countries anymore, they didn't go to nuclearization. They instead pushed for diplomacy. Empirics are on our side, and thus you should affirm.
Can we see the evidence on the turn about domestic terror?
Yeah. Okay, it should be sent. The first card is the link. The second card is the impact.
Yeah, I'll let you know when I get it. Okay, are you ready for crossfire?
Yeah.
Okay. So, let's discuss your turn about increasing terror. Why is it so? If your warrant was true, why would the IEP evidence also be true that says that we've seen a decrease in terror deaths?
Right. Our argument is that the comparative decrease would be a lot larger if the U.S. wasn't in the region. It's
So
like if the US decreases
how
terror,
much offense do you think that really garners you in this round?
not a lot. We read non-uniques too. Like we'll push harder for the non-uniques if you want to know where we're collapsing.
Okay, cool. Do you have a question?
Sure. So let's talk about your responses to our case, right?
Yeah.
So about the idea that like, I just want to understand. You say that there's like threats are still there's still a threat of the U.S. invasion, right?
Yes.
So then why has there like why would anyone ever negotiate if they were always feeling that there was going to be a U.S. invasion in their country?
Well, the warrant we read is that negotiations happen when people feel secure, which is why the thing that the Parsi evidence doesn't take into account is, yes, we pulled out troops, and yes, negotiations happened here. But what happened here was that we were like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, Saudi Arabia. Let me send you the troops.
Wait. So then wait. So why was there not negotiations this entire time we've had troops in the region? Like, why is the Middle East
Negotiations.
fire?
After we sent in more troops, there were negotiations that decreased airstrikes by 80%. That's the Parsi evidence.
Sure. So, like, would you agree that those negotiations are like ceasefires and stuff that the U.S. facilitates?
They're probably ceasefires, yeah.
Yeah, you can take
But
question.
also, it's like the U.S. also does a lot of long-term negotiations in diplomacy. Like the U.S. has a really good track record on the international stage of negotiating things, like post World War I, post World War II. Like after all of these wars, the U.S. has been a keystone negotiator.
Wait, we're talking about proxy conflicts though. Like there are internal drivers of conflicts in these areas.
You give me an example in recorded history of a conflict, like of a major conflict being resolved without the U.S. at the negotiating table.
Like literally just a couple of weeks ago, the Sudanese like genocide that was going on was resolved by intergovernmental negotiations.
Just because the U.S. is still involved in Sudan.
No, but our evidence is so specific in saying that the intergovernmental negotiations, absent external help, is what allowed it to cease. That's
okay, wait, but if the U.S. is still in Sudan, then isn't that a counterexample to your argument? Because the U.S. is there and negotiations still succeeded.
Here's what's really important, though. Our argument is that the reason that this scenario is different is because Iran is not negotiating because of the U.S. Like we can have you really good evidence. It says that Saudi Arabia is pushing for negotiations and Iran is refusing, and they want every last American killed.
Okay, wait. Just explain something to me very clearly. Why, if Saudi Arabia is pushing for negotiations, are they still in conflict in Yemen? Like, why can't they just pull their troops out if they want to negotiate? Why can't they pull the troops out?
Wait, why can't they what?
Why can't they just pull the troops out? If Saudi Arabia really wants peace, they would just pull out their troops from Yemen.
Because then Houthis would launch an offensive because they still see the U.S. as backing Saudi Arabia.
No. It's not even like an offensive. It's just why wouldn't they just cede Yemen to the Houthis? If they really wanted peace, and that is the way that you get peace.
Because they'd immediately get attacked. The U.S. is still backing Saudi Arabia.
The Houthis are fighting for
right? Within Yemen. The logic you're giving me. Like if Saudi Arabia is in a war with Yemen, and the U.S., which is the reason why Iran
is a domestic war, though. They're not fighting on their own territory. There is no chance that the Houthis come and attack them. Why, if they really want peace, would they not just be like, okay, it's fine, you can take the land. It's not our land.
Still backing them. That is why Iran would launch attacks on them again. The only way that Iran goes to the negotiating table,
the Houthis
threatened by U.S. presence, 30 over time. By the way,
fighting. Okay, yes. We'll run some prep time starting now.
Could we see the United States controls Israel's military evidence?
Yeah, one second.
We just got it. We'll start running prep time now. Or actually, we'll start running prep time when I pull it up. Sorry. Yeah, we'll start running prep time now. Okay, that was 45 seconds more used. We have about a minute left.
Okay. It will start on our contention 2, our contention 3, then their case. Let me know if everybody's ready.
Hold on, you cut out. What was the order?
Oh, the order is just our contention 2 first, briefly, our contention 3, then their case.
Okay.
Okay. So on our contention 2, they've conceded the link to our argument, and there's no comparative done between these turns and our argument. There's no way to weigh the turns. There's no reason to vote here. Go to our third contention about about the U.S. security guarantee. First place to vote is on our first link about Israel. They read 2 responses. First of all, they say that the United States has bases in Israel. The issue is our evidence says that when the United States pulls out from another region, A, that means Iran is able to expand, or Israel perceives that Iran has more influence. And B, and more importantly, we say that since Israel sees that the United States has left one of their allies, they fear that the same could happen to them, which is why they become scared. Second of all, they say the United States controls Israel's military. This doesn't matter. Israel has so much influence in Congress, and politicians listen to Israel so much that it doesn't matter if we have control over their military. We're not going to do anything about it, and we haven't done it historically. The reason this is important is because when Israel gets scared, we say they launch a preemptive attack on Iran. And the Farley evidence says that because Israel is so scared, the impact could go nuclear, and our evidence says that would kill 7 billion people. This turns their argument, because if Iran is preemptively attacked by Israel, they're not willing to negotiate, and they're going to become more aggressive. And then obviously Saudi Arabia isn't going to stop the war in Yemen because they see Iran as an existential threat when they ramp up aggression. Second place to vote is on our second link about proliferation. The one response we get is from Parsi that says that Saudi Arabia didn't nuclearize and we did it previously. The issue is A, our argument is not just about allies in the Middle East. Our evidence says that when we pull out troops from Saudi Arabia, our allies globally, like South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Germany, see it as we could potentially abandon them, which is why they begin to nuclearize. They miss this part of the argument. Second of all, we say that the Saudi Arabian and the Arab states didn't nuclearize previously because we didn't fully pull out troops. If we fully pull out troops, then they feel that they have no. They feel like they have no other option. This is key because we say that when states get nuclear weapons, there's an increased chance that they engage in proxy conflicts, according to the Allison evidence, by 54%, because they feel like they can become more aggressive. This outweighs their Yemen argument, A, because it turns case, because if Saudi Arabia develops nuclear weapons, then obviously they aren't going to stop developing in Yemen. But second of all, it turns case again because Iran nuclearizing in response means that Saudi Arabia isn't going to negotiate in Yemen. But third, it outweighs on scope because we're impacting to global proxy wars as opposed to just their one proxy war in Yemen. All this is dropped. Easy place to vote. Let's go to their case. At the top, they mishandled the Sogelman evidence, which is the third response as to why the United States is always going to be aggressive, which is that Israel controls our military and would threaten to launch a preemptive attack, which is why they forced the United States to be aggressive in the past. And so that means that aggression against Iran would not stop. That's dropped. Here's how this would manifest. A is that in the bombing campaign, they said it's outdated because it's about Nixon, but they missed the second piece of evidence we read that said that Trump increased bombings after we pulled out previously, which means that clearly the argument is empirically true. Second of all, we say that it would go through sanctions. They say that it doesn't. Our evidence doesn't say sanctions. You can call it. It definitely does. Here's why this is important, because we say that as long as we're doing something aggressive against Iran, they are never going to negotiate, which means Saudi will not negotiate in Yemen because they're worried about potential conflicts. But then, go to their first link. They've conceded the fifth response, which is a turn that says that when the United States pulls out, it proves the hardliners in Iran true, so they become more aggressive, which means negotiations never happen. They've also conceded the Kidajowski turn on their first impact, which is that when you make the conflict more symmetrical, when you get rid of Saudi Arabia's capability, you make it longer and more deadly. For these reasons, please negate.
Did we see Trump started bombings?
It's in the email chain.
It is?
Yeah.
We'll pull it up.
1 second, yeah.
Yeah, we'll start a little bit.
What's the name of the card?
Yeah.
Aronson,
Aronson. Okay, we got it.
below history.
All right.
Okay.
Are y'all running prep?
Okay, we'll keep running our prep.
All right. Sorry about that. Can you guys hear me all right?
How much prep do you guys have left?
We just use 46.
40. Yeah, we just use another 45 seconds.
Yeah, so that's it, I think.
Yeah, that's it. So it's going to start off on the neg, go to the app. Is everyone ready? All good? Yeah. Perfect. Start off on their subpoint A about scaring Israel. They say that Iran is going to expand, which is why they scare Israel. But they missed two really big responses. First is the Rizé evidence that we read you in case. It says that Iran has a focus of defensive realism, meaning they're responsive. They don't go on to expand, and they don't have a goal of expanding. Instead, they're actually trying to protect themselves. This is all backed up by the New York Times evidence, which goes clean dropped in that last summary. It's really important because what it says is it specifically outlines Iran's goals. It says that they will fight till the last American death. That's really important because what it clearly points out is that Iran's only intentions are to stop U.S. influence from spreading. Once the U.S. is out, Iran has no incentive to keep spreading. The second thing they say is that Israel can lobby in the United States so they can get us to pass it. The problem is our evidence is explicit in saying the United States already fears Israel's strike and will not support it. So no matter how much money Israel throws at the problem, we would argue that it's highly improbable. It would require convincing the U.S. government to become suicidal and throw away mutually assured destruction. Then on their subpoint B about proliferation, they say all allies are going to increase, and that's going to lead to global proxy war. We would argue that the strength of link is really weak here. There's no logic because we've pulled out of multiple other conflicts. For example, they give us evidence about pulling out of Syria. That didn't spur all of our allies to freak out and then start proliferating, leading to global proxy wars. We'd argue that they're way overblown here. There's no empiric precedent for this argument, and they're grasping at straws. Then let's go to our case. They extend two responses. First, they extend their contention 3 here that Israel is going to launch an attack. The second thing they say is that it emboldens hardliners, that when the U.S. leaves, it emboldens Iranian hardliners. This is both responded by the Rizé evidence that says that Iran adopts defensive realism and the New York Times evidence that goes clean conceded. It tells you that Iran is specifically only interested in pushing out U.S. influence. That's really big because that takes out both of their extensions. The only other defense they have on this case is that Trump will continue to bomb. The problem with that analysis is all it says is that Trump, while we had military presence, continued to fight terrorism. We would argue it's far different to keep fighting a proxy war that we're not even directly involved in than fighting terrorism. That response falls. But ultimately, where you can really give it to us is on the internal link, because as we've shown, Iran loses their incentive to fight, and Saudi Arabia is already interested in a proxy war or in creating peace. You can extend the OCAR and 11 evidence, which says specifically that U.S. is the reason that there's blocks of diplomacy. It's the reason that Iran and Saudi Arabia can't get together. Then you can extend the Valesco and 13 evidence. It's probably the best evidence on the topic. It says that regional actors are the best at solving conflicts because they understand the conflict, which is why they're 3.5 times more likely. There's no analysis on that. That's cold conceded link that regional actors are better. And finally, it says that they're more likely to create lasting peace for more than 5 years. Finally, extend the impact. They read these 3 terms, but they don't do any really analysis on it. Remember, they're outdated. The New York Times tells you that there's going to be peace if we get the U.S. out of the region. Extend the Bachman and 18 evidence, which tells you that 22 million people right now are in need, and finish with some impact weighing on 2 fronts. First is risk of solvency. Right now, 22 million people are in dire need. So their world of a risk of a nuclear war, we would argue it's far more important to prioritize a genocide that's happening now. The second is always on time frame. Remember, the Valesco evidence tells you that you're far more likely to create long-term solvency longer than 5 years. They give you no time frame on when Israel decides that it's ready to blow the whole world up. We would argue you can vote on that far more cleanly.
Okay.
Y'all ready for cross?
Can I ask the first question?
Yeah.
If our argument is so low probability, why did you only read one response to it in rebuttal?
Because it's
Right,
low
'cause it's
probability.
low probability, yeah.
Why does it have a low probability? Like, if you concede the link chain, why does it have a low
There's
probability?
our response from Lindoff that says that the U.S.
Can we rephrase the question?
says that it says that the U.S. is already afraid of an Israeli strike, and if the opportunity were to come up, like your link says, they would ground all of the strikes, which is why
Okay.
it's.
So can we agree that in order to win your probability weighing, you need to win some sort of defense on our argument?
Well, yeah, but also we'd say that you need to win some sort of defense to prove that you outweigh our argument, and we'd say that we also have uniqueness.
Well,
No,
we're
no,
not
no.
worrying on probability. We're just saying
that in order for you to win your probability weighing, you need to win defense on our case,
Well,
right?
We would still argue like genocide's happening right
Yeah,
now.
like
We would argue
uniqueness.
that.
yes, but you would need to win reasons why you solved that. So we
Yeah,
agree
we'll win defense.
probable
We'll win
that
defense
genocide
on
is
your
happening
case.
now.
Yes, we will win defense on your case.
Okay, cool.
Can we ask you a question? Yeah, sure. So let's talk about the response you make on top of Iran, right? So, or not Iran, sorry, this is like asymmetrical escalation. So
Which asymmetrical escalation?
how the conflict goes from asymmetric to symmetric. The term that you put on the impact about Saudi Arabia.
Oh, the Kidajowski turn, so it's dropped?
Yeah. So you extend this in your last speech and you say that the symmetric power is going to cause Saudi Arabia to escalate, right?
It just says that Saudi Arabia gets entrenched in the conflict and it gets worse and it's harder for them
And
to
you'd say the conflict is asymmetric right now, right?
yeah, Saudi Arabia is stronger. Yes.
Saudi Arabia is stronger?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is
Okay.
the conceded turn.
Right. So when a power is stronger, do they usually push for negotiations or do they usually try to push for conflict and to win?
Win the war.
Yeah, so why is Saudi Arabia pushing for negotiations right now?
They win the
And
war.
it doesn't matter if negotiations get pushed for. Our evidence says that like they wouldn't push for negotiations because it's super hard for them to do so when the conflict gets entrenched when they're
But well, no, I'm just
They're
trying to understand. Like, you say the conflict is asymmetric. Saudi Arabia is winning, but they're pushing for conflict because they know the U.S. won't come to their rescue anymore. So, in what world does Saudi Arabia start to suddenly escalate when they already know they're losing security from the U.S. and they're pushing for negotiations?
it's not necessarily escalation. It's more that because the powers are equal, the war is bloodier because not one side can't just run through the other.
Also,
like, there
this
are
is
bigger
like-
losses
So
on both
this is
sides.
a new cross app in Grand Crossfire. If you want to
No,
take
Jackson
No,
extended
hold
it.
on.
He extended the outdated, and it's in the New York Times evidence analysis that he also does. But you guys can take a question if you want.
Okay, but then why? Okay, it's fine. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Do y'all have a question? We're okay, actually.
Yeah, if you have one.
Yeah, I guess like if the conflict is symmetric, isn't that incentive for both sides to sign a peace deal and end it? If
No.
I can win.
Both
So-
sides want to engage in the conflict.
So that's A, and B, it's when both sides are like fully entrenched in conflict, it's hard to get dialogue and negotiations where they don't trust each other.
All right, sorry, I didn't start my timer. How much time do you guys have left?
We have like 5 seconds
Like
left.
3 seconds.
Oh,
Okay, we have about a minute left. We'll run that out. We
We'll
will
start
start
now.
prep time now.
They
Okay,
said we pulled out in the past. That's how you read it.
it's going to start on Saudi Arabia. So it's going to start on the overview, the first overview on Saudi Arabia. Then it's going to be my link 1, my link 2 on contention 3. Is everybody good? Okay.
Don't forget to answer there.
We'll run 2 more. Okay, is everyone good? Start on Saudi Arabia. They have functionally conceded the overview. They just say that the Sobelman evidence is a cross-application of our case. No, what we are saying is that Israel and other allies pressure us into re-engaging in the region, which means that aggression does not stop when the United States goes out. And the two implications go clean extended. A is the bombing impact. They just say this is about terror. No, call the Aronson evidence. It's in the email chain. It says that after we pulled out, we started bombing. B, the sanctions thing was not touched in summary. Do not let them read new responses. The Sobelman evidence is super explicit in saying that Israel forced us to put new sanctions on Iran. And the Farish evidence that is conceded off that says that sanctions have killed 500,000 people in there. That is more than the Iraq war has. The implication of this is twofold. A, this is offense for us because it means that sanctions and stuff make things worse. But B, it takes out the entirety of their case because it means that the United States is still being an aggressive actor in the region. So Iran has no need to back down. It is functionally conceded. It is game over on their case. This also means that Iran is not backing down, and so Saudi Arabia will never come to the negotiating table. Their weighing doesn't matter because we're winning turns case weighing. Let's go to our case. So they have three responses by the end, and all of them are new. The first says that Iran's not going to expand. That's not our argument. A, it is the perception that Iran is going to expand that scares Israel, and B, is the fear that the United States will pull out of Israel as a result of the United States pulling out of Saudi Arabia that causes Israel to preemptively attack. Then they say that we can shut down the Israeli military. One, Israel has so much congressional control. That's the Sobelman evidence. You can look at it. They literally forced Obama to take actions, but B, call their evidence it's actual garbage. Then they say that we've never pulled out before. One, this is a new response, don't evaluate it, but B, we say that Saudi Arabia is a keystone ally in the Middle East. Both of our links are conceded. A is that when the United States pulls out, Israel gets scared, and so they preemptively attack Iran. This turns their case because Iran's not going to negotiate. Iran's not going to negotiate because they're scared, and also that means that Saudi Arabia isn't going to negotiate because there's literal open warfare in the Middle East, and so they're going to continue to attack. The second is the global nuclearization link that says that other allies like South Korea, Japan, Germany are going to start nuclearizing as well. This is conceded as well. This outweighs A because it is talking about global nuclearization and an increase in the global link of proxy conflicts. That outweighs, and B, it also turns their case because if Saudi Arabia proliferates, and they have no incentive to come to the negotiation because they are no longer at an asymmetric point. And then this also turns case because if Iran nuclearizes, that increases the chance of the proxy conflicts. Yeah, cool.
Okay. It's gonna go Israel, and then our case. Alrighty. Is everyone ready? All right. On the Rosé evidence, they say it's brand new. No, it's not. It was extended in the first link, which we collapsed on our case. We cross-applied it at the end of the round, which means that it was still extended in Jackson's summary. Remember, Iran does not have the intention to expand, which means that there's no link on their argument. But the second thing that we say is they say our evidence is really bad in Israel, has a great lobbying power inside of Congress, but they miss Jackson's analysis where he tells you that the U.S. isn't suicidal. Our evidence even says that the U.S. is afraid of Israel doing such a strike, and the U.S. would immediately drown all their troops. The U.S. controls their military. That warranting is not engagement at the end of the round. Finally, they say we bring up a new response talking about no empirical precedent. No, this was in my rebuttal. I tell you from Parsi that Saudi Arabia empirically lost all their security guarantee from the United States, and they did not nuclearize. This was in Jackson's summary and dropped by them, which means that you give us clean access to the turn on their case. Saudi Arabia pushes for negotiations. They're going to say that the empirical precedent was never as big, but what we tell you is from the Parsi evidence, Saudi Arabia is not protected whatsoever, no matter what troops are in the region or what mercenaries are in the region. There is no protection of Saudi Arabia. They went for negotiations, non-nuclearization. That proves that those terminal defense are on their argument, no access to the weighing. Go to our case. On this overview, their Israel argument literally is a cross-application. They say that Israel is going to force the U.S. to engage, but what we tell you is that the U.S. is not suicidal. They're not going to engage in things that are going to make them lose. But second, their other extension is this idea that there were going to be bombings. Call for the evidence. It says that they were fighting terrorism. But second, they don't actually weigh how this implicates to our impact at the end of the round. No reason that garners an offense. But then third, they give you the argument talking about Iran's going to escalate with sanctions. They drop by frontline in rebuttal. I tell you that the evidence, do a control F on it. It does not say the word sanctions anywhere in the card. At that point, there is no access to any offense they give you. Let's talk about how we win the round. You can extend the evidence from Jones that Jackson gives you. It says that rogue actors like Iran are more likely to come to the negotiating table because they don't have defiance of the U.S. military. That gives us access to the New York Times evidence that says that Saudi Arabia is pushing for negotiations right now, and Iran is not allowing them because they want to fight every last American. The Octos evidence says that reducing U.S. external presence stops diplomacy, and the Valesco evidence says that we have 5 years where we reach agreements 3.5 times faster with regional cooperation. That outweighs their case on a risk of solvency because we know that uniqueness right now is genocide. But second, on a time frame, there is no way you know when the strike happens or when anything happens, but you know for sure that you can end 22 million people from going into genocide if you affirm.
Good round, y'all.
Which evidence is the sanction evidence?
Okay, I guess we got it in. Congratulations, by the way, on both teams making to the Octos. It was a 2-1 decision for the con. I sat, so I guess I can go ahead and start if that's okay with the other judges. Okay, all right. My problem came down to the fact that if I was going to vote for the con, and frankly, I was leaning very heavily in that direction, simply on the impact that sanctions would have on future Iranian action. And thus, we're presented with a situation where I think each individual judge has to make a call. Do we evaluate the evidence that was not presented during the round and forced one team to take a specific argument path that very well, I could say would have been different if the full evidence would have been presented? I find it hard to go there. It just skews the debate so much. I really do find it difficult to go there. So as a result, that offense that we were going to get, or defense we were going to get, I should say, doesn't come across on my flow. I weigh that against the idea of this global proliferation. The debate there is not really developed well by either side in my estimation, not to the point where I'm going to vote con on it. So that's in a nutshell how I got to my decision.
I can go next if everyone's okay with that. All right, so I think that the round is functionally over when you're conceding like their impact scenario on increasing proxy around the world. So like, even if I buy that you solve the Yemeni conflict, their weighing is just like, we start proxy wars around the world and it's a 54% increase, which makes it like very easy for me to vote on that. But even if I don't want to vote on that, I can still vote on the continuation of the bombing campaign in Yemen, which is like, or I'm not vote on it, but like it takes out your case also. So like, if I am like evaluating the round, I think even if I don't take into account the sanctions, they have clean offense on their case. And your argument is like, honestly, you might have frontlined this, but it was just so messy. Like your frontlines and in rebuttal and in summary and in final focus were like so messy that I don't ever have a clear place to put them on my flow. And I also think that your only response on the overview implications are on the like sanctions argument. So at that point in the round, I just like find there's no reason to there's no reason to end support because we're going to expand proxy conflicts around the world and it's probably going to continue the conflict in Yemen.
I don't really have very much to add. I mean, I think I looked exactly at that concept. I do think that it would have been better if the pro maybe had approached the whole, like I just didn't get the impact calculus that I wanted. I felt like it was really a messy summary and a messy final focus. And I think that the easiest place for me to vote would be on the Israel advantage and the proxy wars and the sanctions. So congratulations, good job, all of you.
Thank you.